My life just hummed along. Not perfectly happy, perhaps, but it was mine, and it felt stable. I'd settled into this comfortable routine with my husband, a sense of security wrapped around me, a trust in the long-term rhythm of our life together. It was just another Tuesday, an utterly mundane afternoon, the kind you never remember until something completely shatters it. I was probably just sipping my tea, maybe even humming along to a song on the radio, completely oblivious to the earthquake that was about to hit. It's funny, isn't it, how one moment can change everything. One minute you're feeling safe, grounded in your own home, and the next, the very ground beneath your feet just vanishes. I had no idea that the calm before this storm was so incredibly, profoundly calm. My world felt predictable, a cozy blanket, and I had absolutely no inkling that it was about to be ripped right off me, leaving me exposed and freezing. Then, my phone buzzed. Just a little vibration, nothing ominous, certainly nothing to prepare me for the icy words that would appear on the screen. I picked it up, probably with a smile, expecting a grocery list or a joke. But then I saw it, stark and cold. Get your things and leave. I have a new girlfriend. It hit me like a physical blow, a punch right to the chest that stole my breath. I felt the air leave my lungs, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Shock, disbelief, a profound, searing betrayal. My mind just couldn't process it. I read the words again, and then again, willing them to change, to be a prank, anything but the brutal truth they presented. But they stayed there, unblinking, mocking. It was so impersonal, so dismissive. My husband, the man I'd built a life with, had just discarded me with a text message. The humiliation was immediate, a hot flush spreading across my face. I tried to call him, of course. My fingers fumbled, desperate for answers, for any explanation that wasn't this cruel. But he didn't answer. Or maybe he did, and his voice was so cold, so dismissive, that it was worse than silence. The reality of it slammed into me then. I was being thrown out, summarily dismissed from my own home, from my own life. I grabbed a bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pack essentials. It was a blur of motion, fueled by pure adrenaline and a rising tide of tears. That first night away, it was a desolate, empty space. I felt utterly lost, adrift, humiliated. Every shadow seemed to mock me. Every silence echoed the emptiness in my chest. The familiar comfort of my bed was replaced by an alien mattress, and the scent of my home, my life, was gone. I just lay there, staring into the dark, feeling the crushing weight of everything I had just lost. But even then, deep down, a tiny spark of something else, something determined, began to flicker. Finding a temporary refuge was like grasping at a lifeline in a turbulent sea. I landed softly, thank goodness, perhaps on a friend's couch, or maybe in a tiny rented room that felt utterly impersonal, yet offered a much-needed haven. Those first few days were a blur of raw grief, a constant ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe, hard to think. I cried until I felt hollowed out, the confusion a heavy fog that kept me from seeing anything clearly. The sheer shock of it all, the brutal suddenness, was a physical weight I carried everywhere. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. The tears didn't come as easily. The confusion started to lift, replaced by a simmering, quiet anger. It wasn't a loud, explosive rage, not yet, but a cold, steady heat beneath my skin. I started replaying that text, those dismissive words, the absolute disrespect of it all. Who does that? Who tosses aside years of shared life with a mere flick of their thumb? It wasn't just the words, it was the entire package. The immediate demand to leave, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenient piece of furniture. And the public admission, the casual way he announced a new girlfriend, as if my feelings, my very existence, simply didn't matter. That's when the true nature of his cruelty, his utter lack of empathy, really solidified in my mind. The shock was finally wearing off, leaving behind a hard, crystalline resolve that began to form, like ice, in the very core of my being. I stopped crying. Instead, I started thinking. My mind, which had been so clouded by pain, suddenly felt sharp, focused. It was as if every tear I'd shed had washed away the illusion, leaving me with a clear, almost surgical view of the situation. I realized that my pain, this immense sorrow, could be channeled into something else entirely. It could be transformed into a strategic fuel, a quiet, potent desire for something more than just survival. I began to meticulously gather information, almost without realizing I was doing it at first. Little details about his finances, his predictable routines, those subtle vulnerabilities he always thought no one noticed. I even started to look into this new girlfriend, trying to piece together the narrative from his side, understanding the landscape of betrayal. This wasn't about being a heartbroken victim anymore. It was about understanding the battlefield. It felt less like grief and more like preparation. I took the first practical steps, securing important documents, cutting off legal access to joint accounts. Each small action felt like a quiet victory, a subtle regaining of control. These weren't grand gestures, just quiet, calculated moves, like a chess player setting up the opening pieces. I was laying the groundwork, brick by brick, for something much bigger, something that would shift the balance in my favor. And in doing so, I was preparing myself for the intricate dance that was about to unfold. My revenge, if you can even call it that, began to unfold with a chilling precision I didn't even know I possessed. It wasn't about screaming or grand gestures. It was about something far more subtle, a deceptive calm that masked the turmoil still churning inside me. I was careful, meticulously so, to make every action appear accidental, an unfortunate coincidence, or simply the natural consequences of his own carelessness. The last thing I wanted was for him to suspect me. I learned that the most effective sabotage isn't loud, it's a whisper. It was like an art form, really, an intricate dance where every step had to be perfectly timed, perfectly placed. I focused on what I knew he valued most, what truly mattered to him: his finances, his carefully curated professional reputation, his social standing, and yes, even that brand new relationship. These weren't random acts. They were targeted, specific, designed to gently, almost imperceptibly, chip away at his world. I wanted him to feel the slow burn, not a sudden explosion. One of the first things I did was subtly expose his unprofessional behavior to a few key clients. Nothing overt, just a quiet, almost casual mention of a past oversight, a gentle question that planted a seed of doubt. The kind of thing that would lead to lost contracts, but make it look like his own fault, his own slipping standards. I also became quite adept at orchestrating leaks of embarrassing personal details to his social circle. Again, nothing I could be traced to, just enough to fuel whispers and speculation. Then there were the financial records. Oh, the fun I had there, meticulously manipulating things within legal bounds to create tax headaches that would confound even his accountant. It wasn't about stealing. It was about creating a labyrinth of confusion and penalties that would gradually eat away at his sense of control. Each move was like pulling a thread from a tapestry, watching it slowly unravel, knowing he wouldn't even notice until it was too late. And his new girlfriend? Well, let's just say a few well-placed, entirely truthful but unflattering insights about his character found their way to her. Nothing overtly malicious from me, just honest observations that might sow tiny seeds of doubt in her mind. I wanted her to see the real him, the one I had unfortunately come to know so well, but through her own perception, not through my direct influence. After all, if he could discard me so easily, what would stop him from doing the same to her? Throughout all of this, I maintained the perfect outward appearance. A sad, but bravely moving on ex-wife. I offered sympathetic nods to mutual friends, perhaps a quiet sigh about the difficulties of divorce. He had no idea, not a clue, that I was the quiet architect behind his growing misfortunes. He was just starting to feel the subtle tremors, but he had no idea they were part of a perfectly orchestrated earthquake. At first, he was oblivious, of course. That's always the way, isn't it, when you're so wrapped up in your own world, your own perceived infallibility? He probably just saw isolated incidents, a lost client here, a minor financial hiccup there, but slowly, inevitably, the cumulative effects of my, shall we call them adjustments, began to pile up. His life, which had been so perfectly ordered, so meticulously controlled, started to unravel in ways he couldn't explain. I could almost picture him scratching his head, trying to make sense of the new cracks appearing in his carefully constructed facade. Business deals that seemed like sure things suddenly fell through, leaving him bewildered and scrambling. His impeccable professional reputation, something he guarded so fiercely, began to suffer from whispers and strange rumors he couldn't quite trace. Even his new relationship, the one he'd so readily discarded me for, seemed to be experiencing unexplained strains. His personal finances became a tangled mess, a labyrinth of minor but persistent complications. It must have been infuriating for him, used as he was to effortless success. I imagined his growing frustration, the slow burn of confusion turning into a simmering paranoia. He'd be looking for enemies, blaming bad luck, pointing fingers at external forces. The thought that I could be behind it all, his meek, discarded ex-wife, would have been utterly beyond his comprehension. His composure, which he always prided himself on, started to crack around the edges. I could sense his growing agitation, even from a distance, like a faint tremor before an earthquake. The man who thought he had everything under control was slowly, steadily losing his grip. He even tried to confront me. Oh, he did. Either directly, with that bluster he always used when he was cornered, or through mutual friends, demanding to know if I had anything to do with his sudden string of misfortunes. But I was ready. I maintained my perfectly innocent facade, eyes wide with feigned sympathy, subtly hinting that perhaps his own past actions were finally catching up to him. I'd just offer a gentle sigh or a wistful comment about how karma works in mysterious ways. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, knowing exactly when the impact would hit. Each deflection from me, each innocent denial, only served to deepen his suspicion while simultaneously making him doubt his own sanity. He was trapped in a web of his own making, only now the threads were being pulled by someone else entirely. The pressure mounted, his face growing tighter, his temper shorter. He was looking for a villain, never suspecting the quiet woman he'd so carelessly tossed aside. And then I knew the moment it clicked. That chilling certainty that must have washed over him like a cold wave. I was behind it. He finally connected the dots, but by then, he was already deep in the trap I had so patiently, so meticulously set for him. The walls were closing in, and there was no escape. He was beginning to understand that the consequence of his actions wasn't just my pain, but the complete unraveling of his entire world. The real show was just about to begin. The downfall, when it finally arrived, was significant. I saw it unfold from a distance, like watching a slow-motion film of a building collapsing. It wasn't a sudden crash, but a series of escalating tremors that led to a professional scandal, severe financial repercussions, and the complete implosion of his new relationship and social standing. He lost so much, not in one dramatic moment, but in a gradual erosion of everything he valued. And as I watched, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. There was satisfaction, yes, a deep, quiet sense of vindication that settled in my bones. But it wasn't the wild triumph I might have imagined. It was mixed with a profound sense of closure, like finally turning the last page of a difficult, painful book. And beneath it all, a weariness, an emotional fatigue from the journey I'd been on. Revenge isn't easy work, and carrying that burden, even in secret, takes its toll. It wasn't just about his demise. It was about my reemergence. Having achieved what I set out to do, having seen the fruits of my painful labor, I felt a distinct shift within myself. The need for retribution, the anger that had fueled me, began to dissipate. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted, allowing me to finally breathe freely again. I realized that clinging to that anger would only keep me tethered to him, to the past, and I was ready to truly let go. I started focusing on rebuilding my life, not in reaction to his, but for myself. I was stronger, undeniably wiser, and fiercely independent. The woman who had packed a small bag in a daze of humiliation was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own resilience, who had faced betrayal and found a deep well of inner strength. That painful journey had stripped away so much, but it had also revealed what truly mattered. I began pursuing passions I'd neglected for years, rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant. It wasn't about finding a new relationship or seeking external validation. It was about rediscovering my own worth, from the inside out. I learned that true empowerment isn't about getting even. It's about moving forward, unburdened by the past, forging healthier connections with myself and the world around me. My ending isn't a fairy tale with a prince. It's something far more profound, a story of self-reclamation. It's about finding purpose, nurturing joy, and standing tall on my own 2 feet, completely removed from the shadow of betrayal. The text that shattered my world ultimately became the catalyst for building a new, more authentic one, and that, I've come to realize, is the greatest triumph of all.